So let's start with Isaiah. Isaiah Owolabi from Nigeria. He's representing here HASI, and he will talk to us about the Zero Carbon Africa. So please introduce yourself and tell us more about Zero Carbon Africa.
Thank you very much. My name is Isaiah Owolabi, and I'm a project director and co-founder at AC. AC was co-founded 16 years ago, and our work is focused on improving the sustainability of the African continent. And what we focus on is by empowering children and young people to create climate-friendly and environment-friendly solutions. And some of these solutions are solutions that affect real sectors. What I call real sector is health sector, education sector, and other sectors such as SMEs, MSMEs, that's small and medium scale enterprise. And what we basically do is the fact that we understand that the bottom line principle to ensuring the sustainability of any project is to give power to children and young people. When children and young people have the power to change their environment or their society, then we can be sure that we can have long-term outcomes that would affect how people eat, consume energy, and also how adults would think about investing in climate solution. So we started by identifying schools and group of young people in Nigeria, training them in the simplest way possible to understand the concept of climate change and also to come up with climate-friendly solutions from renewable energy solution like what we can see in the picture for hospitals. And they started to do this from scratch. They learned how to do it. And most importantly also, it became a social enterprise opportunity for them. Also, we started to teach them about the benefits and importance of tree planting, and also explaining it to them with real life example, helping them to understand and to demystify myths around climate change. We allow them to speak up and tell us what their biases or the misconceptions that they have had in the past related to climate change looks like, and we try as much as possible to educate them on this. But we don't stop at the level of education. We also engage them in taking action through what we call the Environment Education and Action Clubs in secondary and primary schools across Nigeria. That's the picture related to tree planting. We also use the data that we collect from our work to engage government and private sector organizations to invest more in climate change and environment-friendly activities, telling them the reality of young people on the ground and children on the ground, how the reality of drought, for example, or excessive rainfall, for example, which is heavily connected to malaria in Nigeria, and Nigeria holding one of the highest burden for malaria in the world. So those evidences are there to also convince policymakers and private sector to engage them to invest in climate change. These are what we refer to as the climate resilience activity. The last sector of activity where we engage young people, the Zero Carbon Africa champion in 6 African countries, is the waste management, waste to wealth, and water sanitation and hygiene activities, where we work with different groups of young people to help them acquire skills on using waste to create relevant solutions, and also to be able to build eco-friendly toilets within their space. And so far, we've been able to do this in Nigeria, in South Africa, Kenya, Ghana, Rwanda, and Zambia, reaching directly 1,500 exceptional young leaders, over 35,000 community advocates from secondary schools to communities, and they have carried out different climate change projects across the continent. Thank you very much.
Isaiah.
Okay, thank you very much. I would try to touch on the questions. The first question on mobilizing a public school to, for example, include green education. The typical example is in Nigeria. One thing we have understood is that change happens at different levels: individual level, community, institution, and policy level, which is the highest level. That's usually long-term, difficult, more challenging, but it's always good to organize ourselves, either from a student level, work with the head of school, regional head of school, to see how we can send short statement to them to make little requests, not the biggest request, to say we need environment education, we need education on climate change. You know, once you start organizing your groups and you start creating simple, straightforward messages, policymakers take note of it. And that's what we did in Nigeria. And right now in some districts, government districts, they have climate education in their school. In some districts, they don't have it yet, but we are using the same model, building coalition of students who send message to their teachers, from the teacher to the head of school, regional head of school, and it gets up. In terms of social enterprise, climate change, and what this means in big term, what I always advise is think of the data pathway. The numbers have to make sense. And also, if you think about the bottom line principle of sustainable development, which is to leave no one behind, within that same principle itself is to make sure that while you're thinking of social, you have to think of how the business sense meets social. And a lot of people, by the time they are talking about climate change, we think about it in terms of if we do this, it's just because it's good. No, it makes business sense to invest in climate. We only need to find out where the numbers are. And the truth is that the numbers are correct. It makes absolute business sense. The last thing related to policy is the fact that we need to start finding the simplest ways to demystify what policy advocacy means to children and young people, so that when they are speaking to policymakers, they can use their own stories and also stories that link to policy and the possibilities within the bandwidth of policy making to engage with policymakers, so that policymakers can connect the dots of what the realities on the ground with the life of a child and young person to what is happening in their own decision-making chamber to make big policies. So let's find ways to demystify it in the simplest of language, local language, vernacular, or whatever type of language it is, to make sure we include this type of policies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isaiah. Oi, Assício.